Hi, everybody. Welcome to AI TV. My name is Nick Bradshaw. I'm the host of the channel, and we're the sister channel to AI Expo Africa, the annual gathering for everything to do with Fourth Industrial Revolution, AI and technology in Africa, which is happening in September. But as part of our interview series, we always like to interview people that are pioneering on the African continent, and one such person is Jay Shapiro. Jay, welcome to AI TV. So Jay,
thanks so much.
I'll let Jay introduce himself more fully in a second, but Jay is, for anyone new to the channel, Jay was an early internet pioneer in the 90s. So many of the viewers probably watching this may not have even been born then, but the younger guys maybe. But Jay, tell everyone about yourselves and how you've ended up coming to Africa.
Thanks, Nick. Big fan of the channel, so it's great to be on it. So yeah, unfortunately, I'm one of the sort of the gray beards in the industry. I don't know how that happened, but yeah, I started my internet existence. My first tech business was in 1992. I built and scaled a Web 1.0 business that I grew across the globe and then sold, called Blue. Then I started a Web 2 business. That was user-generated content, a drag-and-drop mobile app publishing platform called AppMakr. Grew that to 100 countries and sold that. And then about 5 years ago, moved to Africa. Really sort of just entranced by the potential of the continent and the vibe and the energy that's happening, particularly here in Nairobi, where I am. And I started a gaming business. Originally called Usiku Games in Nairobi about 4 years ago. And then just this past February in Cape Town at the Africa Games Week, we launched what's called the Pan-Africa Gaming Group, or PAG, which is a combination of the top game development studios all around the continent. We are now by far the largest gaming company in Africa, about 300 people and 200 games published. At 270 million addressable market. And what's kind of cool is that this is a Web3 business because we run the whole thing as a DAO, decentralized autonomous organization. And that, as you can imagine, has come with its own wonderful challenges and innovations. And I'm sure we'll talk all about it. So yeah, so that's me, Web 1, 2, 3, 5 years here in Africa and building out the digital ecosystem on the continent.
Well, that's brilliant, Joe. I mean, it's amazing to meet someone who's gone through the 1, 2, 3 versions of where we are with the web, and obviously, I guess historically, you could see that early potential in the platform back there in the early 90s when most people would not even known what the internet was. And I think there's that famous interview with Elon Musk where part of his pitch was always having to explain what the internet was to people, but. Yeah, I mean, look, in terms of why you kind of came to East Africa and Kenya and Nairobi, I mean, we all have seen the news and the innovation and startup scene coming out of there. Was that the primary reason for locating in that region?
So, sort of. I mean, I didn't know specifically gaming, but I spent the last years living in New York. I'm from Canada originally. 13 years in Asia. We were in New York, 2016, Trump happened. We decided it was time to leave. My family traveled around the world for a year backpacking. We bought a backpack each for us and the two kids and tried to find where the next place would be for us to live for the next 10 years. And really just fell in love with Kenya, honestly. The entrepreneurial vibe that exists here, the growth. I mean, it feels very much to me like Singapore did in the mid 90s, that, you can tell it's about to boom. And so to live through that twice in my life is kind of amazing. And from an anthropological perspective, just to be a witness to it is amazing. But as an entrepreneur, it's intoxicating. And so we came here and then really wanted to combine my tech entrepreneurial interest with the social impact work. And this is how you and I really met, through Do Good As You Go, our nonprofit foundation, and to see how in this third sort of chapter of my career, how we could combine those two together. And so we started Usiku as a social impact game developer. We build games that are in some way educational, or have a positive behavior change around social impact. So we do women's empowerment, healthcare, climate change, education, reforestation, those sorts of things through gamification.
Yeah, I mean, that social side of what you do, I mean, again, as you say, that's how we met, through the Do Good As You Go Foundation. But obviously, looking at the broader PAG, the consortium, I mean, there's some pretty big names associated with that. I mean, can you sort of expand a little bit more about PAG and what you guys are trying to do across the continent?
Yeah, so what's interesting is when you look at the gaming industry globally, it's a $200 billion industry now. It's bigger than all of Hollywood, Bollywood, and music industries combined. And yet Africa today is like 2% of the global industry. It's a tiny, tiny piece of it. But when you look globally at the markets that have a potential for 1 billion players, really you only have China, India, and now Africa. And amongst them, Africa has the youngest population, the fastest growing middle class. We have 400 million connected smartphones, more than all of Europe combined, more than all of the US, Mexico, Canada combined. And so the potential is just massive for Africa to become maybe number 2, number 3 market globally in the gaming industry. And yet the industry that is here is highly, highly fragmented. There's no studio anywhere on the continent with more than 100 people. And so the idea of PAG was to bring us together and combine our skills, our resources, our funding, to be able to do real capacity building in the industry, to build up this industry. They say, the tide rises all boats, and that's really true here, where no one company can build a multi-billion-dollar industry. We have to work together as an ecosystem. And so that was sort of the idea of pulling together PAG. And as you say, we have really the top studios from Tunisia in the north to Cape Town in the south, and Dakar in the west to Ethiopia and Kenya in the east. We've really kind of tried to cover the continent with a variety of different skills, different languages, different cultures, bringing them all together and working together. And I'll tell you, we have what's something called the Founders Council, which is just a group of the founders of each of the studios. We meet once a week. And it's like a therapy session. Being like an entrepreneur is so stressful and lonely and whatever sometimes. And so just to get together for 3 hours once a week and talk to each other and share and commiserate the challenges that we're all facing, and then to unite and go together to build this single big industry in Africa that is gender inclusive, that is social impact oriented, that is doing some of the really bleeding edge technology items. It's really energizing and cool stuff.
Yeah, I think just before we started the interview, we were touching on like this phase of our career, well, your career, my career. I mean, I think we said that, never worked so hard at any stage of my career. I mean, Africa is not an easy place to do work. There are certain maybe constraints, social constraints as well, maybe particularly as outsiders like ourselves, where it takes a long time to adjust. And moving here was no easy task either. It took a long time for me to adjust to my new home and the new continent I was living on. But what advice, Jay, would you?
Whenever I talk to investors outside of Africa, I always tell them that in Africa, anything is possible and nothing is easy.
Yeah, that's probably a really good tagline to add to. I mean, I was going to say, maybe, what advice would you offer to entrepreneurs? I get asked a lot about, can I sit on this panel and offer advice, and I'm always keen to do that. But I mean, maybe what are the top 3 lessons you've learned so far being an entrepreneur in Africa and starting this venture and starting this ecosystem? I mean, this is not easy stuff that you're doing.
Oh, it's not. But what I will say is the most valuable and the hardest lesson that I've had to learn being in Africa is how to say no. In fact, just before this interview, I just sent an email to somebody. Great opportunities come along every day. Like there's just so much that needs to be done. So much opportunity as an entrepreneur, so many shiny things to get distracted by, and you'll never succeed if you chase them all. The only way to really succeed here is to focus on what it is that you're trying to do and steadfastly stick to that, which means sometimes being a little rude and just saying, thank you for the opportunity. It sounds really great. I can't do it, right? I need to stick to what we're doing. And that's really hard sometimes. So that's definitely my number one focus. And the number two thing I would say is tenacity. Like I said, nothing is easy, and so you need to stick to it. That being said, number three is that at least in Kenya, I think this is probably in a lot of the continent. For everything that you face, there's an easy way and there's a hard way, um, and and I'm of the belief, from my moral compass, that it's worth taking the hard way. The shortcuts catch up to you, and so we want to build this business and build it properly, build it cleanly, and so as tempting as it may be to short circuit a lot of challenges, I'm of the belief that it's not worth it, and it's not a way to start an ecosystem. So those are my three suggestions.
I mean, coming from you, Jay, I mean, anyone watching the interview, hopefully, I mean, that's sage advice. I have found myself that you do have to say no. You have to turn down very well-meaning invitations or requests to get involved in certain things, and really just say, you don't have the bandwidth. I mean, the one thing that obviously the other side of the entrepreneurial coin is investment. I mean, there is this interesting dynamic that certainly, if you look at some of the key funding rounds which have happened lately, and it seems to be accelerating, a lot of that investment is coming from outside the continent. Jay, what's your take on the investment scene for the wannabe tech entrepreneur? Where should they look for investment, and how should they get it?
Yeah, definitely, I think when I started Usiku, when I first arrived in Africa, there wasn't much. It was really hard, and it was based on personal relationships, right? It was angels in networks that you had to be a part of. And if you look at some of the graphs that have come out, the investment rounds that have happened just quarter on quarter over the last 2 to 3 years, it's crazy how much it's accelerating in Africa. We did over $1 billion investment in the first 60 days of 2022. It's astronomical, and I think mostly well placed. I don't think it's overheated. I don't think there's dumb money coming in yet. But you're right, a lot of it is international, and we're starting to see some very big names like Andreessen Horowitz, investing big sums in Africa. We've seen a couple of big rounds just in the last couple of months, with Mara getting 30 million. Jumbo, the super app, is at 30 million. In Cape Town, there you have Carry First from Andreessen, has raised over 20 million. These are some very big sums that honestly 2-3 years ago were unthinkable.
Yeah, I mean, I've been closely monitoring the deep tech AI space, which is a small segment. And I mean, 5 years ago, there was really not much happening. There are no pure play players there, in that space. But one of the biggest rounds this year so far has been InstaDeep from Tunisia, $100 million Series B.
Mm-hmm.
And that from a small country, and a laser-focused operation with the team there at InstaDeep. That's a massive success for the continent, and I think hopefully an indicator of things to come. And it's interesting to see how Tunisia, as a small country, has got behind the fourth industrial revolution, if I can say that in quotes. But seeing the importance of these new technologies, they have a trade association. The government is behind it. They are encouraging people to jump into this sector. I'm sure you see the same in Kenya. I think Kenya was the second country on the continent after Mauritius to publish a blockchain and AI national strategy in 2019, which is amazing and so integrated in how they're thinking about it. What do you see on the ground, Jay, with some of those ambition from government in Kenya, and them getting behind the sector that you're in and related sectors?
I mean, but before I come to that, let me just say that on the funding side, just on to touch on that last point, what I'm really encouraged by is how many of the stories that I've read over the last few months about companies that are really just doing so well at the moment, how many of them I met at AI Expo.
Yeah.
Zinnia, Where's My Transport, Liquid Telecom, like there's so many great stories. And that AI Expo show really seems to have been a node where so many companies are taking off. And I think that's a real testament to what you've built there. But to come to your question around the government, um, that's a hard one. Uh, you know, Kenya Kenya has a history of being an innovator in digital financial services, right? Everybody knows about M-Pesa. Um, the reality is that's an old story. The technology stack is not fantastic, um, and it's a monopoly. But because of that, 85% of all transactions in the country go through M-Pesa. And when you now have countries, Nigeria, etc., Tanzania, looking at doing digital currencies. Um, Kenya kind of has one already. That's essentially what M-Pesa is. It's paying by bits, not by cash. Um, the government hasn't entirely woken up to that fact, and I think there's really an opportunity for us to reclaim that innovation mantle, and to really embrace that, and recognize the advantages of being truly digital from the financial sector. And they published a report earlier this year, as a white paper, sort of identifying what the questions are, the challenges, but we haven't really had clear leadership yet as to what the strategy is going to be. And I'm curious to see what it is. At the same time, for example, Mauritius published legislation in January of this year, in that area. But we met with the financial regulator, and it hasn't been turned into regulation yet. And so, for all intents and purposes, it doesn't exist in Mauritius. And so that's been a real challenge for us as a company setting up this DAO as well, trying to find a jurisdiction that is within Africa, but that is welcoming of this new form of doing business.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting phrase, a DAO. I mean, do you want to explain a little bit about a DAO to our viewers, Jay, just for people that are new to that concept of running a business?
Yeah, a DAO is sort of like an old-fashioned cooperative. It's a group of people coming together around a single mission or objective, with a decentralized power, so often very democratic through a voting type mechanism, um, often automated. That's the A in DAO, so it's decentralized autonomous organization, where you have smart contracts that are programmed to handle many of the decisions and day-to-day operations within the organization, that then remove the potential for corruption and graft and nepotism, etc., by making it essentially rule based. As anybody who's run a company will know, that's not always completely feasible. And so what we're doing with PAG is that it's sort of a blend, right? It exists on the blockchain. It is token based rather than equity based, in terms of the ownership structure. Um, we are, through governance tokens, relying upon voting systems, that we do on the blockchain. The Founders Council have a whole process of putting through proposals that get proposed, seconded, discussed, and then voted upon. And those votes are permanent public record on the blockchain. And so that's a really interesting way of decentralizing the power, making it much more transparent, way more efficient, because Africa is a highly fragmented market. The regulatory, legal, and financial systems between so many different countries, 54 different countries, would make doing a traditional private equity holding group kind of structure almost impossible to do, or would take a very long time. And so by doing this as a DAO, it allows us to operate on a higher level, on a highly efficient basis. And we think, this is a first example of any company doing as a multinational holding group as a DAO, not just in gaming and not just in Africa. There's very few examples. And we think that this is going to sort of change the nature of organizations in business. I don't want to sound too highfalutin, but I mean, I really think that we're doing something important here.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing that people don't necessarily realize is when they think about Africa and doing business here, is the sheer scale of the continent. I mean, again, if you're looking at an organization that's spread across the continent, whilst the time zone is quite narrow, the distances are huge.
Cultural distances.
Well, yeah, there's that, the language. I mean, yeah, I think Lagos is closer to London than Cape Town is closer to Lagos, kind of thing. You know, there's some interesting geography on the continent. So the DAO model does sound quite interesting on that level as well. Now, I think you recently posted something, Jay, about the Cardano and what's going on that side of sort of DLT blockchain technology. I mean, haven't those guys located in Kenya as well? Is that correct?
So they're definitely putting a big focus on Africa, and I think anyone who's worked on the continent will testify that because things are happening here and there's so much opportunity here, that also brings opportunistic people that really try and take advantage of the continent or see it as a market to be cashed in. And so I have a lot of respect for organizations like Cardano, like Cello, for example, that really are investing the time and where their heart is in the right place to try and do community development, and using the technology in the right way. And that's why I think Africa is such an interesting perspective from a Web3. It's such an interesting place from a Web3 perspective, because crypto and blockchain in so much of the world means it means trading. It means trying to take advantage of what's the price of Bitcoin today. Whereas in Africa, it's all about utility. It's about solving real world problems through the technology. And that's why I think that Africa is really becoming the innovation lab for the world, for the blockchain space. And so much interesting things are happening here, both I would say on the AI side as well as on the blockchain side.
Yeah, I mean, on the AI side, what do you see the hot topics there, Jay? I mean, for people watching who might be thinking, well, I'm looking at a startup. I've got this great idea. I get sent a lot of ideas through our deal room, some very kind of immature and some which sound quite groundbreaking. I mean, what do you see as the trends there?
I mean, I think data is power, right? That's the fundamental truth. Data is power. And so we're seeing more and more examples here through data scientists and models that are being developed, where really interesting decisions are being made from an investment perspective, program planning perspective, et cetera, based on models that are potentially non-intuitive and wouldn't be possible without the machine learning systems that are coming out of so many places in Africa. And so again, that's a great example where I think the utility and the pragmatic approaches of ML and AI are so different from what we see in the West, where it's about, how do I sell more soap? Or how do I increase the efficiency of my supply chain? Whereas here it's changing lives. And I think that's just so inspiring to me.
Yeah, I mean, we're about to launch our State of AI in Africa report on the 14th of June at the CSIR in Pretoria, South Africa. And it's been fascinating to look at the trends. I remember when I started building at the AI Expo Africa community, which is a broadly business, startup and innovation focused community on the applied side of using real world solutions. Back in 2017, I remember looking at an analyst report that was looking at AI startups around the world, and the Africa map was blank. And yet we could see on the ground that there was this kind of bubbling, innovative ecosystem, which had hundreds of startups in it. And so this unreportedness of this continent, the classic gray or white space on the map, the last 5 years, the last 4.5 years of looking at this, you can just see it growing, and it's growing exponentially. The number of startups that are creating or being originated. And if you look at InstaDeep, I think InstaDeep was founded in 2014. So it's taken them, the best part of 8 years to really get to that point where that headline announcement came out in January with the $100 million US. So I think one of my observations around the AI and for IR, and I include the blockchain Web3 space, is I think we've just got this pent up bow wave good news coming. There are a lot of companies who've been chipping away. The deal cycle and the deal flow and the investment doesn't happen as quickly as say Silicon Valley or Asia or Europe. So I think we're going to see some more of these. I think they call them soonicorns or gazelles, or there's some other name for these companies that are going to break through. And I think there's going to be some really interesting stories to emerge in the next 12, 24 months. What do you think?
I mean, I think as an entrepreneur, I'm delighted to be a secret. It keeps the riffraff out. But I do think that investors, governments that ignore Africa because of stereotype or racism or just misaligned understandings of history do so at their own peril. There truly is so much happening here. We are not all living in huts. I've had some very senior meetings with like top people from the U.S. Fortune 100 companies that truly should know better, that ask, like, do people have phones, and is there really a data connection? And, like, they just have no clue. But they'll figure it out, because
Yeah.
it is it's just such an amazing market.
I mean, I think the final point on that, though, is you have to be here. The days of kind of running Africa from the New York office or the London office, sending a guy down to meet some channel partners, and if you want to do real business here, if you want to do real innovation, then you have to be here, and you have to grow a network and get to know people and build trust, because it does take time. I mean, people can sniff
it if you're not.
Indeed, Jay. I mean, that's very true. I mean, just to wrap up, Jay, I mean, where do you see the future now for your business, for the consortium that you've built, the community that you're building? Where do you see things heading now?
I truly believe that gaming specifically in Africa will become probably number 2, number 3 market globally. It's demographics. It's at this point truly unavoidable. And so I think we're bound to head that way. It's like a freight train that you can see is coming. And so that's exciting. And at the same time, it's a race to scale, right? It's our race to lose. And so we have to be efficient. We have to be focused. And if we do, we're going to change the world. And I'm super excited by that. I'm a little scared because we only get one shot at it. But this definitely is our shot.
Well, on that really positive note, Jay, I just want to say thank you for joining us today on AI TV. There's so much that you're working on. There's so much positive stuff that you're beavering away at there up in Kenya with your consortium. I wish you well with the continued journey, and thank you for joining us today on AI TV.
Thanks so much for having me.